Hey, so you guys know I shifted 90% of my workflow last year to an iPad Pro from 2020, and that's because the Intel 13-inch MacBook Pro just didn't cut it for me. After using the iPad Pro for a couple of months, I heard about the M series chips that Apple was making, and I decided to take a plunge. This is my experience of using the M1 MacBook Pro 13-inch after 1 month. I hope you enjoyed. Let's get into it. What's up? Welcome back to the channel. Now, we normally don't do laptops on this channel, but today we're making an exception. You have to remember this is not an in-depth review, but today we're looking at the M1 series MacBooks that came out in 2020 and the M1 chip, which is absolutely game-changing. And that's the only reason why I'm making this video. The M1 chip is insane. Long story short, it's a 5nm chip, which is a completely new architecture. It is made by Apple, so it's in-house silicon, which Apple has finally started using on their computers. And it takes all the power that you saw on the A series chips that were on the iPhones and the iPads to a whole new level. And that's where we got the M series chips. The M1 chip specifically packs a punch in 3 main areas, which is performance, speed, and battery life. Battery life I'm going to throw out right now. It's insane. If I'm not editing on the M1 MacBook Pro, I can run the MacBook Pro for days without actually charging it. It's absolutely amazing. With respect to speed and performance, yes, 90% of the Intel MacBooks from 2020 and before are definitely slower than the MacBook Pro with the M1 chip, and about 90% of Windows laptops that are 15-inch and above are just as powerful as a 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro. So that actually speaks volumes about performance and speed. So performance, speed, battery life are massively increased with the M1 chips, and you're actually going to see it. If you're using an older MacBook and you pick up an M1 MacBook, you're going to actually open up the lid and you're going to see how snappy everything feels, but this has not been incremental. It's been a massive leap. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is design. Honestly, the design is absolutely unchanged. If you have a 2018, 2019, 2020 Intel-based MacBook and you pick up the M1 Max, you're going to see absolutely no difference. The only key features that have actually changed are the keyboard, where they shifted from the butterfly keyboards, which was really hard, lack of tactile feedback keyboards, to the original scissor keyboards which they had on the MacBooks prior 2017. The current Magic keyboards that you have on the MacBooks are a little bit of a mix between the butterfly and the scissor switch keyboards, so it's definitely a better experience. It's the best of both worlds, and I think it's one of the best typing experiences that you can actually have. Other than that, they've also got back the escape key, which used to be on the touch bar originally. I absolutely hated it because there were a lot of times where the Mac would completely freeze and using the escape key was almost impossible, but now having a physical escape key is fantastic. It's the same aluminum uni-build design, which I still think is phenomenal. It's got really great build quality. It's built like a complete tank. You can throw it into a backpack and roam around whenever you want, travel with it, and you don't have to be worried about it getting damaged because it's that solid. And I like the look of the MacBooks, but to be completely honest, seeing something different would have been really nice at this point. This design is dated. A lot of Windows manufacturers have come out with slightly better designs for their computers, so it's about time Apple changes things up. Although I'm not complaining, I'm still a fan of the look of the MacBooks, and I'm never going to ditch that. Now, if there is one thing that's hardware based on this Mac that I would actually want to change, is the webcam. The webcam, long story short, is a potato. Literally, it's a potato. It's absolutely useless. You doing Zoom calls on it is terrible. The image signal processor, because of the M1 chip, has been improved, but it's not that great. And Windows computers, the iPad Pro, the iPhones are years ahead of what you have on any of the MacBooks. Hopefully, Apple will change that this year. No matter how big an Apple fan I am, I'm not going to give them credit for that. The display is the ever-loved Retina display, which is fantastic. It's got really wide P3 color gamut, and it's extremely powerful. If you're going to photo edit and video edit on this computer, you're going to love it. And it's the same for the MacBook Air. They've improved the display on that this year. The colors are fantastic. Even if you're watching content, it's amazing. These MacBooks are integrated with Touch ID, which has been in the Apple MacBook Pros for the last 2 generations, if I'm not wrong. I love Touch ID, but it's 2021. Every portable device that you actually use now comes with Face ID. So while they have Touch ID, I'd be really happy if they could implement Face ID into a Mac, because that would be fantastic. I hope Apple actually comes out with something like that, because that's just something that I've wanted for a very long time. Inside the MacBook Pro that I've actually picked up, the configuration is 8GB of RAM and the M1 chip. Now, the M1 chip has 8 CPU cores, 8 GPU cores, and 16 cores neural engine. It doesn't have a dedicated graphic card, and I know a lot of Windows users right now are going to look at that as a downside, but trust me, 90% of the people out there are not going to need an integrated graphic card. That's how powerful the 8 GPU cores actually are. I've been rendering 4K video files. In fact, the last 3 videos that I've actually posted on my YouTube channel have been edited on Final Cut Pro on the MacBook, which is something that I just got into after I got the M1 Max. And skimming through multiple 4K timelines, rendering these long 4K videos has caused zero stress on this computer. It actually eats through 4K and 5K footage like Garfield on lasagna. It's that good. Overall, the graphics performance is advertised to be 5 times faster than what it used to be on the older MacBook. This is probably the most powerful integrated graphics that you can actually have. Now, I know a lot of Mac users and Windows users out there have heard about the thermal issues that Apple MacBooks have had in the last 5 or 7 years. A lot of people who do a lot of creative work on MacBooks, or video editors, photo editors, graphic designers, have been plagued by the fan. The MacBook Pros have had the loudest fans and the worst thermal management because of the Intel chips that they were running. I've used the M1 Mac. I've rendered a bunch of videos on this. I've used it for just general everyday tasks. Also use it for photo editing, and the thermal management on this is fantastic. The M1 chips are extremely efficient. I've almost never heard the fan kick on when I'm doing just everyday tasks on my MacBook. I think the only time that I've actually heard the fans kick in is when I was rendering a really long 4K or 5K timeline in Final Cut Pro, and that too I heard it kick in for a couple of minutes, after which, because of how good the thermal management is, the Mac actually cooled down relatively fast and the fan actually turned off during the exact same process that I was running on the computer at that point, which is fantastic compared to any of the older MacBook Intel. I'm actually a big fan. It was extremely hard to even figure out that the fan was running. So like I said, this is not an in-depth review. I'm not going to break down absolutely every core in every graphic card. I'm not going to sit and explain to you what a neural engine is, because frankly this is not what we do here. On this channel we talk more about portable tech. So this video is basically about one of the most portable and powerful laptops in the market for creators, and that is the M1 MacBook Pro. Now, is the M1 MacBook Pro actually worth it? Honestly, if you're a gamer, it's probably not. You're better off getting a PC with a dedicated graphic card on it, better off getting a Razer computer. So for gamers, no, definitely not worth it. But for absolutely anybody else out there who wants to buy an M1 Mac, hear me out. So this is Apple's transition phase, which basically means they have 2 laptops that are running on the M1 chips right now, and they have a bunch of laptops that are still running the Intel processors. So a lot of the professional software are still going to be designed in the x86 module, which is basically coded for Intel Mac, which basically means if you have to run those programs on a MacBook which has the M1 chip inside, it's going to run in the form of an emulation. Basically, it's not going to run natively on the M1 Mac. And how this happens is through a program known as Rosetta, a program that Apple has used for their transition before, and they brought it back, revamped it, and it's fantastic. Honestly, 90% of you out there using 90% of these applications that run on emulation will not even figure out that they're running off an emulation, because they're going to run a lot faster than they actually did even on an Intel Mac. And that's how powerful the M1 chip actually is. Whereas for apps that are actually supported on the M1 chips, such as Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, Xcode, Lightroom now, Google Chrome, a lot of these apps have been converted to run on the M1 chip. Now, these apps are already optimized and they are running extremely well. They run better than they've ever run on any Apple computer, and you're gonna actually see massive performance gain. So if you're somebody who's in the market who needs a laptop right now and you're looking at the M1 MacBooks, trust me, just go for it. Take a second before you buy the Mac, figure out if the programs that you actually use are running natively or they're running via emulation. Keep that in mind, and even if they are running off of emulation, you got to know that 90% of the programs that are running off of emulation right now are going to run faster than what they have ever run on an Intel based Mac, irrespective. And eventually in a couple of months, this transition from running on an emulation to running natively is going to be complete, and you're going to be extremely satisfied with the M1 MacBook. But if you're somebody who's in the market and you don't necessarily need to buy a MacBook today and you can actually wait, I'm going to suggest that you hold off for a couple of months. Now wait for the next iteration of the M series Macs that are expected to come out this year, which is going to be called the M1X or the M2, whatever Apple decides to name it. And the reason why I'm telling you to wait is because a lot of the applications that are running on emulation right now are going to be a lot more stable. They're probably going to be running natively on the M series Macs at that point. Furthermore, you're going to be waiting for a new M series chip, which is expected to be a bit more powerful, or maybe even a lot more powerful than the M1 chip. And that's going to give you something that every consumer needs, and that is options. Options are extremely important because at that point, you're going to have an entire lineup of MacBooks at various sizes and various price ranges, and all of them running M series chips inside of them, which basically gives you a ton of performance gains, irrespective of whether you buy the M1 Max or you buy the M1X or the M2, and you're going to be able to make an informed decision basis what your actual needs are. The M1 MacBook Pro currently has so much more power than I need currently, and I also think it has a lot more power than I would need in the next couple of years. Even if I'm editing 5K video, it's so easy to do that on this computer. So I'm going to stick with the M1 Mac. I'm probably not going to get the M1X or the M2 chip MacBooks, because the iPad Pro from 2020 and the M1 MacBook Pro from 2020 together are an insanely powerful system, an insanely portable system for me to carry around, and I'm extremely happy. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was my experience with the M1 MacBook Pro. It's been fantastic. It's a phenomenal portable machine for any creator out there. It's also an insanely powerful machine for anyone who just wants to do everyday tasks on a computer. It looks fantastic, it feels fantastic, and I'm extremely happy with it. Thanks for watching another episode of Essential Tech. I'm going to see you in the next one. Peace.